morning. My voice went. What an absolute pleasure to be here. It really is lovely I spoke at the first SearchLeeds a few years ago, so it is so nice to see how it's grown. So it really is such a privilege for me to be talking to you today. Welcome, welcome. I am going to be talking to you all about the science of creativity, and that is how to train your brain to have better ideas. Hopefully this talk will kind of inspire and motivate you in some kind of way and will be a nice start point for the rest of your day. So I'll start by very quickly telling you a little bit about me. For those of you that don't know, my name is Kirsty. It is my birthday. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much. You may know me as the founder of Manyminds, an SEO agency. I am an accredited confidence and creativity coach. So a lot of what I'll be talking to you about today is based on neuroscience and the fundamentals of the brain. I wrote a book that people seem to like, which is funny because I thought it was shit. And I today founded my new business, Raw Training. Cool, so it's a big day for me. So let me start by talking to you today with a fact. And that fact is that did you know that with 11 items of clothing, there are 39,916,800 different ways to get dressed? Our brains are hardwired for predictability and structure. We really need, as humans, to be able to predict the future based on what's happened in the past. Without that fundamental hardwiring, it would take us about 76 years to get dressed in the morning. Humans, so businesses too, operate on this quantifiable predictability. And we can kind of really see that in digital marketing. Forecasts, metrics, targets, KPIs. Our kind of internal need to feel security in knowing what's going to happen next. Now, this is a really good thing. It allows us to measure success and do all of that very important thing as marketers. But what it also means is we reward not making mistakes. We create cultures within our businesses and within our teams where it is really hard for us to empower people to be creatively brave and to take risks with the work that we're doing. As a result, we tend to reward people for just not fucking up. To illustrate this point, I interviewed 200 marketing directors and CMOs, 74% of which said that they are unlikely to take a creative risk with their brand. I see some kind of like knowing smiles in the audience. What that means is that 87% of us, the people doing the work, can't get our best ideas signed off. Now, to me, this is so sad. This is so sad because of all of our best, coolest, most innovative stuff. All of our most creative, brave ideas are sitting in some big no bin somewhere. They're sitting in a big old pile of no. Can you imagine the kinds of work that we would be doing if people were happier to be braver and were less obsessed with needing to understand exactly what was going to happen next? So all of this happens. But meanwhile, at the same time, the average consumer is exposed to around 4,000 ads a day. Now, that excludes all of the organic social and the content marketing and all of the PR and the link stuff that we're doing. That is a lot of ads. That is a lot of ads. Do we have any Germans in the audience? Okay, cool. So as a result of this, ad blockers are on the rise. Now, it is globally a rising phenomenon, but I really love that Germany's leading the way. 40%, nearly half the country of Germans are like, no, thank you. No, thank you. This will get more and more. Now, as people who work in organic, which I guess is most of us, this perhaps doesn't impact our day job, but what it does do is it tells us a shifting mentality. And voice search will begin to have an impact. This will start to impact us. I'm sure we will hear much more about this today. But there is an agency in London called We Are Roast, and all they do is voice search. And I saw the founder of that agency speak at SearchLeeds last year. And he did a really cool talk where he presented lots of very robust data. And one of the things that really stuck with me from his talk was he spoke about a Q2 versus Q3 comparison in 2018, where there had been a marked shift in people asking voice devices, book me a hotel, book me a restaurant. We'll start to see it, particularly in these spaces first. And I do not need to remind you all of this, but I am going to anyway. I'm sure you're all familiar with Rand Fishkin's excellent talk he gave at Brighton SEO last year. His key data for me, again, was that there was a 20% drop in mobile organic CTR, which has been replaced by a 20% increase in no-click searches. So a 20% increase in Google keeping consumers on the search engine results page. This is shitty, and it's mean, and it's going to start really affecting us. So historically, what I have done a lot of is try to get links. And I used to be pretty good at it. And then we worked extensively with Metro. One of the journalists there, over a period of about 10 years, became a friend of mine. And I would always speak to her if I wanted to understand whether a campaign I was doing was any good. So I sent her an email. This is about a year ago. I sent her an email, and she didn't get back. And I sent her another email, and I was like, have I annoyed her? And she just replied saying, I get thousands of press releases a day, literally thousands. And I was like, OK, yeah. I've annoyed her. The market is saturated. We are operating in incredibly saturated markets. I would be lying if I said to you that the performance of the work as an SEO that I was doing today performs as well as it did 3 years ago. Now, that is not because me or my team are getting worse at our jobs. It's just that the market is getting more saturated. Competitors are getting better. SEOs are getting better. Consumers are expecting more. So it is getting harder and harder. And hopefully you're sitting in the audience and you can resonate with perhaps some of that struggle and that sense of that the jobs we do, the goalposts are changing, and we need to be mindful of it and aware of it. And I believe that the way that we stay ahead of this is through creativity. Using creativity to incite emotion, to emotionally resonate with our audiences. We can see this in our culture, but also in all of the campaigns that really have nailed it over the years. All of these things that are really resonating for us now on a big scale are things that have emotional resonance, authenticity, brands that care, brands that start to have an opinion and awareness of the world around them. Now, it's not just me that's saying this. Science also supports it. So research from the University of Doha, they did some MRI scans. It always seems to be psychology students they do it on. If anyone here is a psychology student in the audience, I hope you're okay, because it's always the experiments on psychology students. So what they did, they put all of these students in MRI scanners, and they identified, and they asked them to evaluate brands, to say whether they would buy from that brand, whether they liked that brand. And they identified that consumers use emotions. It was the emotional center in the brain that was firing up when identifying brands. So feelings, experiences, rather than information. Not only does this positively improve the sentiment we feel about a brand, but emotion enhances our recall of a brand or a product. So we're more likely to remember something, to go back to something, to like it afterwards, to share it, to link to it, whatever it is that your metric is, if it emotionally resonates. And that is much longer lasting. So we all kind of know Starbucks don't make great coffee. They make pretty shitty coffee. But that's okay, because they are not selling coffee. They are not in the market of coffee. Starbucks is selling aspiration, or at least they were. I think the reason for their success is always pointed to the fact that they sold an ideal of who you could be. You could walk around the streets with your coffee and go into a coffee shop, and it was all very modern. So they sold that idea of aspiration. It was that emotional resonance that gave them their success. And we can carry that through into our work as well. A recent research report by Nielsen in 2018 showed that creative quality, when it comes to marketing, is the most important factor for driving sales. Now you have other things, brand reach, targeting, recency, and these things are increasing in importance. But 47% identified that the creative quality of the marketing and the advertising was what was most likely to influence somebody purchasing from that brand. So this is all well and good, but this is quite high-level marketing advertising, right? And actually what we're doing is quite different. It's technical, it's on the ground. So this is a live photo of me at the start of the year. And I did lots and lots of research over a few weeks in January to try and identify whether the importance of creativity also happens in a digital marketing or an SEO context. So I researched 3 high-ranking sites across different niches. I looked at travel, e-commerce, cool e-commerce brands where the products are great, dry e-commerce brands when it's kind of like plumbing supplies, travel, finance, and I analyzed the top 150 links that were earned over that year. And I manually analyzed thousands of links with my eyes because I have no life. And this stuff is important. But what I was really trying to get to was it creative? Was it this notion of like emotional resonance and creativity that was actually making people share and link to this content that had really, really performed? If you want to, you can go away and read the post. There it is. There's lots of specifics and tactics in that you can go away and read. I won't cover that so much today. I'll leave that there for a second for some the photo people. But what I will talk about was kind of the overarching theme. And that is that the format of the content, i.e. was it a video, was it a blog post, was it an infographic, was it a press release, whatever. The format of the content was only ever an added bonus. The thing that actually sets performing content apart, I identified the thread between all these thousands of links was three things. Authenticity. Is it real? It's the difference between the email I got this morning saying, hey, Kirsty, we can see you're a woman that does things for women. Would you like one of our suitcases so you can travel like a woman? It's the difference between that and the difference between, I don't know, changing a policy to create gender parity. It has to be real. It has to be genuine. It has to actually come from a place of meaning. And that can be anything. Timing, is it relevant? Is it on our press agenda? And is it original? I just kind of went through that. So authenticity, being emotionally resonant, being genuine, saying something that you actually care about, or at the very least is some kind of in line with the brand and makes sense for that brand to be talking about it. Timing, is this already on our press agenda? Is this something we're already talking about? Is it something that's kind of within our culture and within our collective consciousness at the moment? And originality, so either a new concept or just saying something old in an interesting way. That is consistently the three things that I found all performing content had. It's worth saying that creativity by no means guarantees performance, but it does boost it. For every creative campaign I saw that really nailed it, there were tens that really, really didn't. I'm going to have a little walk over here and look at you chaps. It's quite a big stage. That took a while. So creativity does not guarantee performance, but it does absolutely boost it. So I find this kind of weird. So throughout my life and my career, I have invested time, money, effort, and energy in learning digital marketing skills. I've been on an analytics course. I tried to get good at Excel. I've spent far too long trying to code. I have invested in all of these skills as an individual and as a business owner, but I have never once invested in the skill of creativity. It is not something we stop and work at. But I believe we really do not need to start investing in creativity as a skill that we have, that we can develop. I think this is important now, but this is getting more and more important. There was some research I read recently that said in 2020, the most important skill for employees entering the workplace will be creativity, because you can't automate that. Okay, so a raise of hands. Who in the audience believes you are a creative person? Got a lot of you. You guys, it's cute. Okay. So a raise of hands, who does not think you're a creative person? Okay, cool. So for those who raise their hands because you didn't think you were a creative person, now also raise your hands again if you're in tech, analytics, a developer, a technical SEO. Yeah, I'm glad that worked. We have an idea that I think is specific to this industry, to marketing, that you are either creative or technical, that you cannot be both. And I really want to debunk that right now, because it's not the case. I'll talk about the science in a minute, but even if we just think about all of the engineers and the innovators and the scientists, these are all incredibly creative people. To illustrate this point, I was going to show you a picture of Tesla, but I think we're all bored of seeing male scientists. So here is Mary Jackson. Mary Jackson was an engineer. She was one of the first IBM technicians. She was a mathematician, creative as shit. You can be both. We should strive to be both. It is not that creativity is left for those of us who work in content. Everyone can be creative. Okay, so I'm going to talk a weird segue now about Sputnik. Is anyone here Russian? Okay, so I am not a historian, so I may say some details now that you may not want to Google. But I'm going to talk about Sputnik. So it is 1953 or 9, I can never remember. And Sputnik 2 was launched into space. It was a triumph of engineering and innovation, and Russia's like, yes. And then meanwhile, you have the US that's like, we need to do something about this. The reason this is interesting in this context, I haven't just lost my mind, is because NASA started investing billions in its space program. And for the first time in human history, creativity as a concept, as a thing that we can learn, started to be studied. So NASA started trying to identify the common thread between its engineers that were innovating and those who were not. And they asked them all sorts of questions. They said, what do you have for breakfast? How do you sleep? What is your routine? What is your sexual orientation? What is your relationship with your parents like? They asked them all sorts to try and kind of pin down what it was that was making some of their scientists innovative, creative, and others not. They only managed to find a thread when they asked them one question. They said, do you believe that you are a creative person? It is those who believed that they were creative that were doing the innovative stuff. Mindset has a huge impact on our ability to think of new, interesting, complex solutions to things. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the point I really want to ram home is that creativity is a skill that can be learned, developed, and applied. We can kind of think of creativity as like swimming. Some of us have a genetic predisposition to be better swimmers than others, but we can all learn to swim. We all have that ability as able, well-bodied individuals. And this isn't just me. The science agrees. The science agrees with this. A neuroscientist called Thomas Pizzello at Rhode Island University did some research on twins in the 70s when that shit was cool. And he was trying to identify markers of intelligence and whether intelligence was genetic or learned. And he found hereditary variation, i.e. genetic. He found that in things like IQ. But when it came to divergent thinking, another way to say creativity, there was no evidence of hereditary variation that appeared in the divergent thinking measures. So for those of you that are sitting in the audience, and you may have a belief that I am not a creative person, there is nothing genetic within you that's creating that. That's just a belief. Maybe it doesn't resonate with you as a concept, but there is nothing genetic that says you are or are not a creative person. So more recent research also suggests this. They researched children with creative parents. And they identified that cumulatively, over that child's lifetime, the children became more creative over time. So, i.e., they were learning creativity. They were learning the skill of creativity. So this is cool. The University of Lancaster did a study a couple of years ago where they gave 10-year-olds, they had two groups of 10-year-olds, one who watched movies with magical themes and one who did not. 3 weeks later, when they asked those children to conduct some creativity tests, it was the children who had watched the movies with magical themes that performed better in the creativity tests. Because what we surround ourselves with and our beliefs can impact our thinking and thereby impact our performance. And if that's not an excuse to go home and watch Harry Potter, I do not know what is. So you have some really smart neuroscientists that know way more than me. By the way, if anyone's interested in this stuff, feel free to email me afterwards and I'll send you the papers. There's some scientists at Harvard and Yale that are trying to identify what creativity looks like in the brain. Now, the neuroscientific research on this is new. It's quite new. We don't know huge amounts about it. But what they have identified is, unlike other things, creativity doesn't have a single home in our minds. Fear sits in the amygdala, memory sits in the hippocampus. So it's quite unique in that way. Typically, these kind of processes have a home in our brains. But actually what creativity is, what real, true creativity is, when we're coming up with those really great ideas, when we're coming up with campaigns that are really new and innovative, when we're fixing technical bugs and we've thought of a new way to solve that problem, what's happening there is an interplay between all of the different systems in our minds. So creativity, real, true creativity, is when we're connecting neural synapses for the first time. A direct quote from this paper is that we can consciously influence ourselves to have greater creativity by practicing exercises which require it. Now, this isn't coming from me. This is coming from those people who have PhDs and have dedicated their lives to doing this research. We are in control of how creative we are as individuals. And we're in control of it simply by exercising our minds. Now, the brain is not a muscle. I made the mistake of calling it that in a talk once. The brain is not a muscle, but it does behave like one. We kind of need to train our brains if we want to get really good at being creative. Take it to the creativity gym, or whatever. I don't know why I said that. That was weird. Forget it. Too late. So what I'm going to talk about now is three things, how we can do this. So the science says we're in control of our creative thinking. It is within our power to be more creative. I really believe that it's in everybody's best interest to do that, no matter what you do. And there's three things we can do that. So habits, we can develop habits that enable our brains to do this. 2, brainstorms. We can improve the way that we do brainstorms and we work as teams to make our ideas and our solutions that we come up with more effective. And 3rd, process. So develop a creative process to get better at it. So what I'll talk to you about first is habits. Get it? I should be better. I should be better. I'm not. You're giving me nothing. You're giving me nothing. Go on, habits. Fine. It's my birthday. Laugh at my habits joke. Okay, so habits. I'm having a nice time. Okay, habits. Yes. I lost my thread. So I used to be a stand-up. You probably literally can't tell with that bad joke. And in 2015, I was doing loads and loads of stand-up. I did a one-woman show at the Edinburgh Fringe. It was a really weird time of my life. And I, at that time, got really good at writing puns. I got very good at writing snippy, quick little puns. And there's a few things that are happening there. In 2019, I was like, I am going to do stand-up again, in that way that you kind of like decide to redefine yourself in January. So at the start of the year, I was like, I'm going to do stand-up again. Sat down to try and write a set, and I had nothing. I had nothing. I was like, well, that's it. I'm not funny anymore. I have lost it. And so there was 2 things that's going on. Firstly, mindset. My mindset was different. I'd kind of got out of that place where I was doing it. I wasn't using that part of my brain anymore. Second, research from the University of Zurich tells us that our brains anatomically change according to our primary skills. So our brains physically look different depending on what it is that we're doing. So for example, a tennis player's brain will probably look different to an accountant's brain. Like, isn't that wild? So my brain was probably anatomically different then to it is now. And we're in control of this. The things we do, how we construe situations, how we spend our time, has a physiological impact on the anatomic structure of our minds. Wild. I mean, maybe you find this crazy too, or maybe I'm just a raging nerd. Who knows? So what I believe is that businesses and individuals too have to develop habits to enable their staff to be creative, to allow their teams to be creative and start getting better at creative thinking. Now, I promise you, this does not look like sitting at the same desk on the same time, day in, day out. If we think back to what creativity really is, it's trying to think of new, different solutions that we're kind of connecting. It is really, really hard to do that if we're in the same patterns and the same routines. Also, that some things that supports this is there's some research that says because we so heavily associate it with newness and innovation, the color green is the best to kind of elicit creative thinking. Also, you have your best ideas in nature. Now, bear with me. This may seem like super whimsical, like, oh, I'm in the trees, I'm walking around, I'm having all my best ideas. It's not actually that. The reason that we tend to have clear thinking in nature is simply because if we're around trees, the oxygen is better. There is clearer oxygen around trees, therefore our brains have more oxygen so we can think more clearly. So what I implore you to do is if you have a very complex problem that you need to solve, if you have a new idea that you really want to come up with, if you're stuck in a rut with creative campaigns for your clients, if you find that you're never thinking of something that really is genuinely cool and new and original and you just can't get there, leave the office, leave the desk, go outside, put yourself in a new situation. If your boss asks questions, send them to me. I don't care. There's a chap called Tim Harford that wrote How to be Creative and Resilient in a Tiny-Minded World. One of the key points that he identifies is that highly innovative scientists and people move between topics more quickly than their less innovative peers. So those people who are highly innovative, who are coming up with new ideas, who are coming up with solutions to problems that people haven't thought of yet, the people who are coming up with the most powerful, coolest creative campaigns, they are the ones that move between topics more quickly. So what this means is we need to develop areas and skills outside of our primary day jobs. If real creativity is connecting different concepts, the best way to do that is to have as many strings to our bow as possible, to make it easier for our minds to start making those neural connections. Has anybody read this book by Edward de Bono? Okay, good, because this would have been boring if you had. This book is called How to Have Creative Ideas. He's kind of thought of as the grandfather of creativity. And he suggests many different things we can do in the moment and over time to improve our creative thinking, to kind of train our brains to get better at this stuff. So I do recommend going away and reading that. But one of the things that he suggests is something called random words. So that is when you take a random word and you put it against a defined focus to stimulate new thinking. So, for example, if you take a moment now and try and think of, I don't know, a situation you're trying to find a solution to, a client you're trying to come up with a new creative campaign for, whatever it is, and you think of what that problem is, and then you think of a random word like paper clips. How could you solve that problem using paper clips? It sounds batshit, but go away and try it. There's something called a random word generator. This is so widely adopted in the creative community that there's something called a random word generator that will give you a list of words as stipulated by Edward de Bono. It's a really, really good thing to do as an individual on your own. Just spend 3 minutes in the day doing this, and your brain will start to get better at connecting different things and thinking of new solutions. And it's also a really cool thing to incorporate into brainstorming sessions. There's also a guy called Dr. Robert Epstein. He is a badass. He has dedicated 20 years of neuroscientific research to help us as practitioners, as people who work in, I don't know, like marketing and businesses, to be more creative. He wrote this book, which I think we can all agree has the worst book cover in the world. But it's a really, really good book. It is packed full of games and tools and things that you can do to kind of build those habits to improve your creative thinking. So I would implore to go away and read that. But he also did this. So what I would recommend is taking your phones and putting mycreativityskills.com into them or making a note of it, and do this test tonight. Not now, stay with me, we're nearly there. But do it tonight. And what this is it's a survey that you fill out, and it asks you questions about how you store ideas, about your environment, about how you live, and it will give you a score based on his 20 years of brain science and cognitive psychology research to tell you how optimal your living conditions are to have good ideas, how optimal your conditions are to think of new things and come up with solutions to the problems that you're having. So I did this, and my creativity competency score was 79, and I was like, dude, I'm totally 100%, but it was 79. And so the things that I'm not great at, so it breaks it down into 4 categories. So preserving new ideas. So that is how good are you in the moment when something pops into your head of going, oh, okay, and writing that down, making a note of it. He says that ideas come to us when we don't really know that we need them. This is something that the brain science also supports. Our really good stuff is least likely to come to us when we're feeling under pressure, when we're feeling nervous. So in those moments when you're like, that's weird, when you think of something really weird and you're like, why am I doing this? Just make a note of it, go back, read through it. Preserving new ideas is one of the key things you can get into the process of doing to improve your creative thinking. Seeks challenges, so tries to do new things, has a growth mindset, isn't worried about failure. Broaden skills and knowledge, so having things outside of your primary day job that you can start learning and reading about and having those interests so you can connect things better, more easily. And then changes to physical and social environments. So like I said, if we stay in the same place, if we stay in the same environment, it is harder for us to come up with new and different solutions. If you are not at liberty to go for a walk in the woods of a Friday afternoon, like most of us, then that's absolutely fine. Go, just step outside, go to a different office space, sit at a different desk, just stand up, get out, change that environment in a small way, whatever it is. This is my visual representation of a brainstorm. Raise of hands, who here uses brainstorms as their primary way of coming up with solutions and coming up with new ideas in business? Yeah, most of us use kind of brainstorms. So basically, brainstorms don't work that well. let me tell you why. So this is the American Psychological Association, and this is a direct quote from what they said. This is not me being an asshat, this is them. They said, research has consistently found working separately to be superior to groups interacting verbally. In over 50 studies, the evidence speaks loud and clear. Individuals working separately generate many more and more creative ideas than groups. The difference is large and robust. There's a few reasons for that, and it's worth saying. You may be sitting there going, well, I have some great brainstorming sessions with my team. Like, that really works for me. And that's probably because you have a good team dynamic where you know each other and trust each other. But there are things that happen during a traditional brainstorming session. Yeah, we're not doing it right. So the things that happen, there's three things. There's production blocking. You may be familiar with this. This is when you're sitting in a brainstorming scenario and somebody is talking and you have this amazing idea, and then you sit there going, well, I can't say that now because they're talking. I need to wait and be polite. So I'm going to hold on to this idea. I'm going to hold on. I'm not going to forget the idea. And then I'm going to wait for a time to say it. And it's gone. So that is the instance when you forget or focus on remembering rather than generating, and the listening just overrides your ability to come up with new ideas. It's really hard for us to multitask. So coming up with new ideas is quite a difficult thing for us to do whilst we listen and kind of engage in like social corporate courtesy and all of that nonsense. This may also resonate with you. There is evaluation apprehension, so risk of criticism. You may be somebody who, like me, will sit in a meeting or a brainstorm and go, well, that's stupid. I'm not going to say that. I think I'll get laughed at. I don't think I'm going to say that. I think he'll think it's stupid. Can I say this? My boss is here. Or there is free or overriding, when certain members rely on others or take over. So there might be somebody in a brainstorm that always is the one that's speaking up, always is the one that has the ideas. And these are the things that we know to be the case. It happens to us as individuals in brainstorming sessions. When I talk about brainstorming, I'm simply talking about a bunch of people getting into a room and verbally communicating with each other. Now that's cool, like, because it's very beneficial, but we can recreate this where we still get all of the good stuff about brainstormings, like snacks. So a guy called Paul Paulus, real name, Paul Paulus, from the University of Texas said, actually the best way to engage in a brainstorming session is you can get together in a group, in a room, have biscuits, but rather than verbally communicating, take a notepad, pen and paper, write it down, pass it along. Let other people add to your idea. So you get that collaboration, but what you're not getting is people sitting there thinking, oh, I don't know when to say my idea. It gives everyone a frame of reference. It's also anonymous, so it removes the risk of evaluation apprehension. So I would really recommend, if you're in the market of coming up with new ideas and things, to really, really try and do this. It's very simple. Remove the verbal communication and try writing it down. You will find the ideas that come out of it are much richer. A lot of this research was conducted in the 90s when computers were kind of new. So a lot of the research was thinking about how technology can impact the way that we're creative and the way that we have ideas. And research found that idea generation online is a really, really good way to do it, because somebody can have an idea and somebody can go away and think about it and have some thoughts and maybe do some research, and it removes all of that pressure, all of that stuff that we've just spoken about. So the way I interpret this as a modern woman, don't know why I said that, is Slack. So using Slack as a tool. Who here uses Slack? Yeah, everybody, of course. I didn't have time for a designer, so do you like my very secret information things there? So using Slack as a way to generate ideas. So you can put something in, you can put an idea in as it comes to mind. There doesn't have to be a formal place or a structure for how you are generating your ideas. So what we also want to do is then train our brain to develop a creative process. We need a process. We need to understand the ideas that we're coming up with are real, and we need data to validate them. So I'm going to give you an example of my creative process. This is subjective. We are all different. All of our brains, as I mentioned, are anatomically different. So some things will really work for you. This is what works for me. So I'll give you an example of, I was working with an agency a few years ago to help them come up with creative campaigns for one of their clients who were a paper shredder. That is what they did. It's quite a difficult market. So what I recommend you do is you sit down with a piece of paper and you write the core thing in the middle. So what's interesting here is information management, and then you just go. Now you want to time it. You want to have about 30 seconds on the clock. And what you want to be doing in this moment is just sitting there. Wine helps. It's just sitting there with a big piece of paper and just writing. We don't want to be critical. We don't want to be analyzing ideas at that moment. What we want to be doing is trying to find those connections and those neural synapses. That won't happen if we're being critical and we're being analytical. So you want to kind of be sitting there. You want to be like, I don't know, just like Writing ideas like you don't care about the consequences and you don't care what people think and you're just writing. You kind of want to be like Boris Johnson in that moment. In that moment, you want to just be awful and just write things like a drunk person at a party, writing all of those things down in that moment, no other moments in your life. And so you want to start getting to that point where you find things that are a bit weird. I got to Pearl Harbor somehow. That was too far. But don't know how, information, paper shredding to Pearl Harbor, it was tenuous. But that's what we want to be doing. We want to be trying to find those things that we hadn't otherwise thought of, and then we want to start validating it. I personally use BuzzSumo for this. I'm sure you're all very aware. So once we have those topics, once we have those themes, put them into BuzzSumo to identify the kinds of content that are being linked to, talked about, shared, all of that good stuff. So in this particular example, when we looked about paper shredding, one of the things that we spoke about was information management, security, and something that comes up very heavily in this instance was that data security was not a concern for millennials. This was a few years ago. So I worked with that agency, and they created a campaign, and it was one of their most success. I just said sex. Oh my god! It was it was one of their most successful campaigns. It was a millennial-targeted data security guide. The data already existed. And it did incredibly well for them because they had been through that process. They had gone through the process of identifying those connections that they wouldn't have otherwise thought of. So in summary, what? Thank you. That was the worst of all my jokes. And that's the one you guys, okay. So in summary, so in a world where people avoid risk, but we need to be creative, what we want to be doing is embracing our innate creative ability to create genuine connection and emotional resonance. If you take nothing away from this talk, other than the fact I accidentally said sex, then please do take away from the fact that everybody has an innate ability to be creative. There is nobody in this room that is not a creative person. If you weren't a creative person, you wouldn't be getting dressed in the morning. You wouldn't be able to find your keys when you lost them. You wouldn't be able to drive. We can be creative. We can think of new things. Recognize creativity is a skill that you can learn, hone your innate creative ability, and then develop a process that works for you, that uses data to validate those ideas. So thank you so much. I hope that helped, and you have a wonderful day. Thanks.